Morning, everybody. At least it is in the UK. Good morning to everybody else, wherever you are. Night time, daytime, afternoon time, whatever. Today, I want to talk to you about the anomalies that we face in our dimension, largely caused by the fact that we've got an interdimensional aspect of our existence, a reality which sometimes people find it difficult to grasp because it is quite a complex and involved subject. Our view of reality fits quite nicely on Earth in our normal day-to-day lives. But unfortunately, when we start talking about the universe, multi-universes, parallel universes, and the fact that our view of reality is completely flawed by our lack of senses, or our lack of depth to our senses, the fact that we can only see a very tiny amount of the light spectrum, same would go for hearing. So we've got very limited information to go on. And as I've said before, our brains cultivate a little model for us to project onto our what we believe to be true and accurate, but in actual fact it's not. We're basically living in an illusion. Now, most people find this difficult to believe because they may well think that, well, I can see things and I can do this and I can hear that, and they trust their senses. But as we all know, our senses can be very easily fooled, and any magician will tell you that. Any conjurer, anybody doing party tricks or anything like that knows full well that the human mind is incredibly easy to trick. And I thought today I'd explain something that people have been asking me about. I'll try to anyway. People ask me about ghosts and where do they come from? What are they? Spirits, different beings, shadow people, all sorts of apparently spirits, what may be defined as spirits that approach people in their lives from time to time. I have to say it's something that's never happened to me. I can't say I've ever seen a ghost. I've had some weird experiences, but I can't say that I've ever seen an apparition or anything like that. I have felt the presence of strange beings, but not actually witnessed it myself. So what are ghosts and where do they come from? What are they? Firstly, well, I believe that when people die, their spirit or their soul gets transferred to another dimension. And I believe if we went to that dimension, we'd find everybody there that we've ever known who've passed away. Most of the religions agree on this subject. They disagree on most everything else, but they agree on the fact that there is an afterlife, and it's a place where basically each person's soul goes to when they're finished in this life. So in other words, that by definition, that means that at the point of birth, or sometime before that, the soul is put into this human body to live a life, get experiences, hopefully learn from those experiences, and then at the point of death, move back to the dimension where our soul exists. And many of the souls that have passed away are there. It's also a belief of mine that we have a shared consciousness. All human beings are essentially tied by this common consciousness. And once you accept that, life becomes a whole lot easier, because what it means is that essentially every person is related to every other person in terms of their consciousness, because they have a shared consciousness. That makes it easier to suss out what's right and what's wrong. Because if you accept that everybody that you deal with on an everyday basis and everybody else in the world has a shared consciousness, and that means that we're all linked. Well, what it means is that if I were to hurt another person, it means that essentially I'm hurting myself, which doesn't make sense, does it? So when you look at all the philosophers, the religious people who have told us how we should live our lives, one of the main tenets of that is that we treat other people the same as ourselves. And the reason for that is they are ourselves, because we have a shared consciousness. And when we die, we go back to a central point, if you like, where those consciousness merge back together again. You might find this a little bit of a difficult thing to get your head around, and I can understand that because it's not an easy concept to grasp. But basically, at the point of death, we return to another dimension where we join a shared consciousness which exists there. Perhaps at some point, your individual consciousness gets reborn into another life. And there is some evidence for that. There's certainly people who can relate, either in hypnosis or in dreams or stuff like that. They can remember stuff that a life that they had before the one that they're in now. Indeed, I've had experience of this myself, talking to very young children who will relate to you that they had a life before. And they find it difficult that you don't understand, or other people don't understand what they're talking about. They'll say things, for instance, like, well, this, when you say to them, they'll be relating a story, and then you say to them, well, when did this happen? And they'll often say, well, it happened when I was big like you, meaning an adult. And they will relate when they had another mummy and daddy, for instance. And in other words, in their early life, they still have memories from their previous life. And it seems that those memories diminish once the child gets sort of above sort of the age of toddler. Once they're about 3 or 4, those memories have all gone. And you only tend to find that you'll get those children relating those memories when the child is one of those children who learnt to speak quite early in life, a very early talker. By the time they're 2 or 3 and they're talking quite eloquently, some of them, not all children do, of course. Some can only barely string words, a few sentences together, and only talk about very mundane things. But some children, and I've had experience of this, can talk quite eloquently by the time they're perhaps about 2 or 3 years old, in a way that is a little bit, seems they're older than what they actually are. And they'll tell you about past lives, this situation where they had different parents and stuff like that. Sometimes they can even describe a house that they used to live in. And when you go along and track down where this is, lo and behold, the property does actually exist. But their description, very interestingly, may be slightly different. The house looked different in their time. And then when you check records, you find out, yes, indeed, they are describing the house how it was a long time ago. And the question then is, well, how did a 3-year-old child know that? And it's difficult to put forward an explanation other than that they actually lived there in a previous life. So, although this doesn't prove anything, because scientists, of course, will say, well, we can't, this is not empirical evidence because we can't repeat this over and over again. Well, fine, yeah, that's okay. You go back to your little science lab and discover that the conspiracy theory in some time, what you call a conspiracy theory, will sometime be proved correct. And those of us who have been used to being called conspiracy theorists, by the time you get to my age, I mean, I'm quite old now, so I probably won't be here for much longer. But by the time you get to my age, these beliefs that you had that people used to laugh at and call you a crackpot and make remarks about tinfoil hats and all the rest of it, when the time winds on and you get to about my age, you suddenly find that all of a sudden science is accepting this. And of course they're doing what arrogant scientists always do. They pretend they knew all along, despite the fact that these very same people have been pointing the finger and laughing. Take the situation at the moment that we've all seen in the media. All of a sudden the Department of Defense in America have come forward and said that they're actually tracking and have film evidence or video evidence of what they call UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. Of course, for years these have been called UFOs, but they've suddenly come up with this different title now to try and confuse people, because for years they've been telling us that it's all a load of rubbish, that people are making it up, they're idiots and they don't know what they're looking at, and blah, blah, blah. And they've put a great deal of time, effort and money and resources into disparaging the whole thing. The whole idea that UFOs, in other words, craft doing strange things, well outside the envelope of any known aircraft, are visiting our existence on a regular basis, and there's nothing apparently that our military aircraft can do about it. They can virtually hardly keep pace with them, let alone do anything. And there's been evidence of a lot of interaction at various times. For instance, aircraft have been affected, particularly their weapon systems have been disarmed. Nuclear bunkers have been disarmed, gone offline. And of course, all this has been kept secret, and it's been via the media and the various intelligence organisations around the world have disparaged this idea that these UFOs were real. And it's been left to people like myself and many, many others who have been ridiculed, called conspiracy theorists, called every disparaging word you can think of, to try and ridicule the whole idea. And now, lo and behold, here we are in 2021, and an official agency in America, the Department of Defense, are now confirming that actually they do exist. They're not saying what they are, because I think they're doing this as they normally do in political circles. They do things a little bit at a time, because they think that we, the public, are so stupid and so delicate that we can't handle the truth, and they think that we're all going to freak out and stuff like that. Well, guess what's happened? UFOs have been acknowledged by the American government now, and what's happened to the ordinary people? Are the people running around hysterically, about it? No, they're just getting on with life like they normally do. So why don't they just tell us the whole truth? Well, part of that, there's many reasons for this. Like, these things are always multifaceted. Firstly, these craft are interdimensional. I've been saying this for years, and I've had a lot of criticism from people for saying this. People, mainly actually within the UFO world, didn't like to hear this until probably about 5 years ago. Well, I was saying this 20 odd years ago, 30 years ago, that these are interdimensional craft. And to get your head around that, you need to completely rethink your view of reality. And some people don't want to do that. It's easier just to say that they come from Zeta Reticuli and all this sort of stuff, and just leave it at that, because that's something they understand. To get your head around the multi-dimensional universe and parallel universes and stuff like this and other dimensions requires people to actually put their brain into gear instead of having it idling in neutral, which most people have, and start thinking for themselves. And a lot of people don't find that difficult. They just like to go along with the crowd because it makes them feel more secure. They pretend that they're mavericks and stuff like that, but actually they're not. They're just going along with the crowd, basically. And I got a lot of abuse from people, particularly on social media, when I was describing the parallel universes, multi-dimensions, interdimensional travel, all this sort of stuff. But I was, I feel I've been used as a conduit from somewhere. I've been passing this information to me and using me to disseminate this information. And it's not just me. I think there are lots and lots of people around the world who are doing exactly the same thing in their own little way, just gaining this into the consciousness of most human beings. I think this is what has been happening. So we now get into this situation where the American government have admitted that there's stuff flying around doing all sorts of incredible feats, well beyond the envelope of any known aircraft. And a lot of these things are what we would call physically impossible. A craft going at 4,000 miles an hour that stops dead and then changes direction in an instant, we would call impossible. But there's no such thing as impossible, is there? Because things that were impossible a few years ago are now every day. These are prosaic things that happen. So what's impossible has to be redefined virtually on a daily basis now. And of course, science does that. But what science debunked a few years ago and called a load of rubbish and these people are crazy and blah, blah, blah. Usually the word conspiracy theorist comes into it, the phrase conspiracy theorist comes into it to just dismiss things without having to actually offer a factual argument. It's much easier just to put a tag to somebody and then just use that tag and to just discredit that whatever they're saying by discrediting the person themselves. This is a common tactic that people use all the time. Now they're having to admit that actually, yes, it is true. And now they're pretending that they knew all along, which is what scientists and official people do. They spend years and years and years debunking stuff, laughing at it, ridiculing it. And then suddenly, when they suddenly find out that actually it is true. You know what those conspiracy theorists have been saying? Well, it turns out that they're actually correct. Oh, so what we do now is we'll just pretend that we knew all along, and that we've made this discovery, rather than those people we've been ridiculing for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And of course it is a little bit annoying, to say the least, when people do this. But I suppose we should get used to it, because that's what science does constantly. A lot of scientists, frankly, are arrogant. And I don't use that word lightly. They're arrogant. They think that they know everything. But in fact, they know hardly anything, because we don't know what the sum total of knowledge is. We can't even guess. Right? So how do you know what percentage of it you actually know? Okay, it's like having it's like being given a small piece of cake without knowing how big the original cake actually is. So how do you know how much of the cake you've got? What portion you have? How relative to the size of the ultimate size of the cake? You don't, is the simple answer. You know, if I offered somebody a crumb of cake, they've no idea how big that cake was that it came from. So likewise, scientists, they know their little bits, and they sit there and they write their little books, and they give this little lectures at universities and stuff like that. And they think they're all so clever, don't they? And yet they don't even know how much they know. Therefore, they don't realise how much they don't know, because they don't know, metaphorically speaking, how big the cake is. So that little crumb of knowledge that they have in their possession, I'm afraid they don't know what they're missing out on. There is a much bigger piece of the cake still to be discovered. Unfortunately, scientists don't look like things that way, particularly nowadays, because it's very difficult for people now to make any kind of offer any kind of view. If you look at all the discoveries that's ever been made, it's always started with some guy using his imagination. You know, let's take for instance flight of aircraft, which has happened within the last 150 years, no, a couple of hundred years, let's say. Now, it started off with some guys in a workshop just dreaming about making an aeroplane that flew. At that time, the only thing that flew was hot air balloons. And science, you know, those scientists, those clever people I was telling you about, the ones who lecture at universities and stuff like that. Well, if you go on to the top universities at the time, they'd have been telling you absolutely with all the conviction in the world that it is impossible for anything that's heavier than air to fly. That's what they were telling people at the time. But there were guys who were, they'd be called conspiracy theorists now, who said, no, we think we can do this. So they got a load of stuff together, mainly bicycle parts and bits of fabric and stuff like that, all off their own bat. They weren't sponsored by any government or anything like that. They just did it themselves because they just thought they'd had this dream. They dreamt it first. So every invention has to be dreamt first by somebody. Somebody has to dream about this. And they have to go through all the derision of other people saying that it's impossible. You're an idiot. You're a nutter. You're a lunatic. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're out of your head. All this stuff. They have to go through all of that first. And then they wheel out their little invention. Probably the first ones don't work. They never do. And then they slowly adjust them, and they adjust this, and then make a new one of these and redesign it slightly, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually, the Wright brothers got their little aircraft out of their bicycle factory, because that's what it was. And this thing managed to fly for a few yards. All of a sudden, all those clever scientists who were lecturing everybody, writing books, telling everybody that it was impossible for anything that was heavier than air to fly, suddenly had to rethink their thoughts on this. And it was actually the case, apparently, that for years afterwards, I mean, some years afterwards, the Wright brothers would be called cheats and liars. People were saying it to their faces, that they'd lied, that the whole thing was a lie, that they cheated people and all that. I mean, people wouldn't believe that they'd actually done this. And again, that you know, anybody who's in at the sort of who's dreamt about stuff and then thought, yes, I know that this can be one day this will be true. I mean, a lot of people, for instance, in the UFO world, have said to me that they would never see what people call disclosure. It's a bit of a strange term, but basically disclosure is the recognition by science and mainstream and governments that UFOs exist. Many people thought that this would never come in their lifetime, because the governments for years and years and years have been covering this up. And many people never thought it had come, and obviously it has come now, because the American government have said that there's things flying about that they don't know what they are. They know who it's not. They know it's not them themselves. It's not one of their aircraft that they're testing, despite the fact that some people are still saying that it is. Well, I don't think that the Americans would, or anybody else would, fly an aircraft of that caliber in airspace that's controlled by their own military. Or, you know, they would test it in an area where there's nobody watching. In other words, they would certainly not take the risk of having it crash in an area where any potential enemies could get to it to discover what its secrets are. I'm afraid the military don't work like that. They do not go flying their aircraft, revolutionary aircraft, over airspace that's not completely controlled by them. Sorry to disappoint people, but that is the truth. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. So it's not the Americans. And they also know it's not one of their allies, because they would know about it. It's also not one of their, shall we say, not so friendly countries, because they would know about that as well. There are no secrets in the world now. With the levels of surveillance we've got and the budgets that the intelligence services have, nothing is secret. So the idea that the Chinese or the Russians or anybody else could develop an aircraft that could do that without the Americans knowing all about it is zero. I can tell you that. Absolutely zero. Because they're surveilling the entire planet with satellites and all the rest of it. So the minute they wheel this out of the hangar, the Americans would know all about it. I can tell you that for sure. Right? We all know that they've got satellites and stuff like that can read the number plate off a car. Do you really think that the Russians or the Chinese are going to wheel out an aircraft and start testing it, even in their own country, in their own airspace, without the Americans knowing about it? Don't think so. So it's not, in other words, it's nothing that originated on this particular planet in this particular dimension. So where are they coming from? Well, as I've said to you before on these videos and other places as well for a number of years before I was even making these things, they're from another dimension. And the reason that these people are here, I say people because they are people, because they probably share the same consciousness that we share as human beings. So we are them and they are us. There's an expression that I've been told to use. And they're here to observe what we're up to. And frankly, I think they're rather disappointed. In fact, I know they are. And they were very concerned as well, because we're not that far away with our technology of discovering how to get from our little dimension where we are and go to other dimensions And that's when we'll encounter these people in their home territory, as it were. And I don't think these people are all that bothered about the human race as it stands at the moment, coming blundering into their reality and bringing all our warlike hatred and greed and all the other negative aspects of humanity with them. So they're basically come here to tell the powers that be here, as they did before. They've been here before, and the message then was, you know those nuclear weapons you've got, stop detonating them. And the reason for that is, people often think because they're bothered about humanity. Well, that's one argument. Another argument, which I think is more appropriate, is that nuclear weapons, every time they're detonated, have an effect in other dimensions. And I've analogized this on many times, and people who know me will be probably fed up of hearing me say this. But when you detonate a nuclear weapon in our dimension, it's like chucking your garbage over next door's fence. In other words, the effects of that nuclear explosion not only occur here, but they have some effect in other dimensions. And the powers that be on Earth were a long time ago told to get rid of those nuclear weapons, or at least stop detonating them. Because this is not only affecting you, as in the humanity here, but it's also affecting other dimensions as well, in parallel dimensions. And the same way they're here again now, because they're very concerned that where we are with our technology, we're not that far away from discovering how to get to other dimensions, and they're not prepared to have that. We're not ready yet. We might be technologically ready, or not far off. In terms of our human existence, our spiritual awareness, our awareness of how we should conduct ourselves, we're a long, long, long way away from being ready to travel to other places where we're going to meet other beings. They're quite, used to coming here and encountering us here, but they don't want us coming to their party, thanks very much. They don't want us dropping in at their houses anytime soon. We're a bit like a troublesome neighbour. You try to ignore them, but when they start affecting, banging on your front door and wanting to come into your house and bring all the disruption that you've witnessed in their house over to your property, well, you're not so keen on that, are you? Don't want them round here, thanks ever so much. Well, that's how they look at us. And what we've got to do is sort our own planet out. Basically, if there's any sort of world leaders listening, I can give you a few indicators on this. Firstly, stop using the world as a garbage dump. Or probably no, I should move on a different one. Let me change the order of these. Firstly, stop killing each other. Stop building all these weapons to kill each other 2 million times over, whatever it is we can do nowadays. Yeah, the money that you spend in all that, don't spend it on that. Let's spend it on feeding the world, giving power to the world, giving everybody a decent life. This is an abundant world that we live in. It's made to look as if it isn't, because there are people making a great deal of money out of creating shortages, because then the price goes up. So they're deceiving you. They're telling you there isn't enough this, there isn't enough that, this is in short supply. Bull. I'm not going to say the full word, but it's bull. They've done this deliberately to create a shortage, which then inflates the price, which then makes them more money. This is the way it works. But there's plenty to go around for everybody. So we could utilise the world's resources that's currently going into arms and stuff like that, into new technology that could sort out these kind of problems for people who live in places that aren't so lucky as we are here in the United Kingdom, where you turn the light on and the light comes on, there's food in the shops and there's everything we need. Well, that could happen all over the world. So that's the first priority. Other priorities, and I'll not put these in any necessarily into an order, but how about giving us technologies that don't, those technologies you kept secret, those patents that disappeared into a little vault somewhere to get covered in dust. I think Mr. Tesla had a few of those long ago, where you could create energy, from all sorts of sources that at the moment you can't. In other words, it involves everything apart from oil. Well, that's another thing as well. Okay, that's been around a long time, that capacity, that capability, but it's been hidden because there are people making a lot of money out of oil. Some of them have approached me, believe it or not, asking me to come and use my remote viewing skills and to find their oil for them, and I've declined. Don't want to get involved with people like that. Don't care how many millions they want to give me in commissions and stuff like that, because that's the way it works, you see. They give you a commission on everything that you find. So if you can find a nice big oil well, you make a hell of a lot of money. But I don't particularly want to make money like that. Not my thing. Not particularly bothered about driving around in some supercar and living in a massive house. Thanks very much. Not that bothered. Don't do anything for me. As long as I've got enough, I'm all right. But that's the way it works. And I've been approached a couple of times actually for that, and also for other things like looking for diamonds, gold, everything else. Yeah, and some other things I can't tell you about because I'm not allowed to, because there are people, I had to sign bits of paper, and if I told you stuff they'd get very upset about it, and I don't want to upset people like that because they can turn quite nasty. But that's another story for another day. But I will tell you this, I won't try and remote view the far side of the moon ever again. There you go. And let's just leave it at that. So where does that leave us now? Well, we're living in a world now where the world's very much changing very quickly. We've still unfortunately got the worst people in the world to be leaders, as I was describing earlier in last week's video, or the other day's video. My despair, and that's the word, of the fact that the most incompetent buffoons, corrupt, evil people seem to be in control of everything, because that's apparently how humanity works. And I can't see that changing unless there's some kind of intervention from outside. And I think that intervention is probably getting nearer and nearer. In fact, I don't think there's a probable about it. I think it's almost a dead cert. But perhaps we'll talk about that another time. So for the moment, if you have any comments, which a lot of you have been DMing me and stuff, feel free to let me know. In the meantime, I'm not going to try and remember this time. You see all those buttons, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Just press them all for me. Great, because it helps me. And I'd be very much obliged if you would do it. Like the videos and stuff like that. And I'll see you again very soon. Love to you all. Take care. See you later.